There's a moment in almost every traffic stop that decides everything. Not when the lights first flash behind you. Not when you pull over. Not even when the officer walks up to your window. It's the moment when you realize you're no longer just answering questions. You're being evaluated. Every word, every pause, every reaction. And here's the part that most people never realize until it's too late. Sometimes, saying the right 4 words at the right time can completely change how long that stop lasts, and whether it goes any further at all. But here's the truth that most viral videos won't tell you. There are no magic words that automatically force police to let you go in every situation. That's not how the law works, and believing that can actually put you in a worse position. So before you get too comfortable, let me ask you something honestly. If a police officer pulled you over right now and things started to feel like they were dragging longer than they should, would you know exactly what to say to regain control of the situation? I want you to answer that in the comments, because most people think they would. But when the moment comes, they hesitate, they guess, and they end up saying too much. And what you say in those moments matters more than you think. So let's break this down the right way, because the 4 words everyone keeps talking about are not a trick. They're not a loophole. They're a question, a very specific question. Am I free to go? Simple? Direct? Powerful? But here's where people get it completely wrong. They think saying those 4 words will instantly end the stop. It won't, not by itself. What it does is something much more important and much more subtle. It forces the officer to define your status, and that changes everything. Let me explain. In the United States, a traffic stop is considered a temporary detention. The officer has a legal reason to stop you, maybe speeding, maybe a broken taillight, maybe something else. During that time, they're allowed to handle the reason for the stop, check your license, run your registration, possibly issue a warning or a ticket. That's normal. But here's where the line exists. They cannot extend the stop longer than reasonably necessary without additional legal justification. And this is where things get interesting, because many stops don't end when they should. They stretch. The officer starts asking unrelated questions. Where are you coming from? Where are you headed? Do you have anything illegal in the car? Mind if I take a look? Now, these questions might sound casual, but they're not random. They're designed to gather more information, or to develop a reason to extend the stop. And most people, without realizing it, help that process. They answer everything, they explain, they try to be cooperative, and in doing so, they unintentionally give the officer more reason to keep the interaction going. Now this is where those 4 words come in. Am I free to go? When you say this calmly and clearly, you're not being disrespectful. You're not refusing to cooperate. You're asking a legal question, and that question forces the officer to make a decision. Either they say yes, you're free to go, or they say no, and now they need a legal reason to keep you there. That's the shift. You're no longer passively waiting for the stop to end. You're actively asking whether it has already ended. And that matters, because if the original purpose of the stop is complete, and there's no reasonable suspicion of anything else, they cannot legally keep you there just to keep asking questions. But here's where I need you to really pay attention. Timing is everything. If you say, "Am I free to go?" too early, while the officer is still legitimately handling the reason for the stop, it won't do much. They'll simply say, "Not yet," and that's valid. But if you say it after they've already taken your information, gone back to their vehicle, and returned, that's when it becomes powerful. Because now the original purpose of the stop is likely finished. And if they continue to hold you without a clear reason, that becomes legally questionable. Now let's talk about how this plays out in real life. You're driving, you get pulled over, you provide your license and registration. The officer goes back to their car, you wait, they come back. Instead of immediately saying whether you're getting a ticket or a warning, they start asking more questions. This is where most people start talking. But you don't. You stay calm. You stay respectful. And at the right moment, you say, "Am I free to go?" Now watch what happens. The officer has to respond. If they say yes, you leave. If they hesitate or say no, they now need a reason. And that's where things become more structured. Now here's something important. This question does not guarantee that you'll be released. If the officer has developed reasonable suspicion of something else, they can legally extend the stop. But here's the key difference. They now have to justify it. And that changes how the situation unfolds. Because without that question, many people just sit there, answering more and more questions, not realizing the stop has already gone beyond its original purpose. Now let's talk about tone, because this is where people mess up even when they say the right words. If you say, "Am I free to go?" with attitude, frustration, or sarcasm, you change the entire dynamic. It becomes confrontational, and that can make things worse. But if you say it calmly, almost neutrally, it becomes a simple request for clarification, and officers respond very differently to that. They're trained to deal with all kinds of behavior. Calm confidence stands out. Now let's go deeper into the psychology behind this. Officers are trained to control the flow of the interaction. They ask questions, they guide the conversation, they decide when things move forward. Most people follow that lead without thinking, but when you ask, "Am I free to go?" you interrupt that flow politely. You introduce a legal checkpoint, and that forces the interaction to reset. Now, instead of an open-ended conversation, it becomes a defined situation, detained or free. That clarity is powerful. Now, here's another layer most people don't think about. Silence. Once you ask that question, you need to be comfortable with silence. Don't fill the gap. Don't start explaining. Don't say, "I just want to make sure." No. You ask the question, and you wait. Let the officer respond, because the moment you start talking again, you lose the advantage of the question. Now, let's address a common fear. What if asking that makes me look suspicious? Here's the reality. Suspicion is not based on one calm, respectful question. It's based on behavior, inconsistencies, and evidence. Asking if you're free to go is a normal, lawful question, and when done properly, it doesn't create problems. It creates clarity. Now let's look at a situation where this goes wrong. You get pulled over, you're nervous, the officer asks questions, you answer everything. You start explaining where you've been, why you're late, what you're doing. 10 minutes pass, then 15. Now you're frustrated. You suddenly say, "Am I free to go, or what?" That tone, that timing, that frustration, it changes everything. Now it feels like a challenge instead of a question. And the officer may respond differently. That's why control matters from the beginning, not just when you get impatient. Now imagine the same situation, but handled differently. You stay calm from the start. You provide what's required. You don't overtalk. And when the moment is right, you simply ask, "Am I free to go?" No emotion, no pressure, just clarity. That version works very differently. Now here's something I want you to really understand. These 4 words don't give you power over the officer. They give you awareness within the system. They don't override the law. They operate inside it. And that's why they work. Because you're not fighting the system. You're navigating it correctly. Now let's go one level deeper. What happens if the officer says, "No, you're being detained"? This is where most people make another mistake. They start asking, "Why?" in an aggressive way, or they start arguing. That's not the move. If you're being detained, the situation has shifted. Now it's not about ending the stop quickly. It's about protecting yourself. You stay calm. You stop answering unnecessary questions. You don't escalate. Because at that point, anything you say can be used in a different context. Now let's bring this all together. The power of "Am I free to go" is not in the words themselves, it's in what they trigger. Clarity, structure, accountability. It forces the interaction to move forward instead of dragging on. And in many cases, that's exactly what ends the stop faster. Not instantly, not magically, but efficiently. And that's what you actually want. A clean, controlled, lawful end to the situation. So the next time you find yourself in that moment, waiting, unsure, feeling like the stop is stretching longer than it should, you won't guess. You won't panic. You'll stay calm. You'll understand the timing. And you'll ask the one question that changes everything. Am I free to go? And that simple shift is what puts you back in control.